Concerns are raised to the head of the U.S. Postal Service from Representatives LaHood and Sorensen over the possibility of jobs moving from Peoria into a Chicago suburb. It was announced that Peoria's USPS facility that employs more than 120 people could be moved to Bedford Park, a suburb of Chicago. This is part of USPS's $40 million transformation plan to modernize Postal Service operations. Both representatives say risking local jobs and disrupting timely mail delivery is unacceptable. In a letter, both Sorensen and LaHood wrote to the head of the U.S. Postal Service to understand the change more. Part of it reads, quote, "For employees unable or unwilling to move from Peoria to Bedford Park, which is 150 miles away, what efforts are USPS taking to provide retraining programs or alternative opportunities within the Postal Service?" End quote.